Well, basically what we're doing is following up on Memphite theology. Of course, for us to do Memphite theology, justifiably, we would spend months, probably years, going ahead and go deeper and deeper. But of course, the purpose is to engage ourselves in this dialogue, this encounter, and also to share with you the reference material so that you can go back and start dealing with the material yourself. And of course, we're going to continue some ongoing subjects and different components will come up back and forth. What I'm going to do today is, again, I started working with Memphite theology some more, and some other stuff started coming out. I'm going to share some of that with us, which then opens up a whole new area of study. Okay. So, first of all, I handed out this piece from Sacred Science. What attracted me, first of all, it talks about the philosophy of myth. It's very important because how we have to take our minds back and merge our thinking into the thinking of the dynastic times, really the animistic thinking of African people. How we literally fought in symbolism and imagery, but how that imagery actually contained factual information, scientific information. So we talked about here Pharaonic myth and its teaching, as well as the nature and aim of the temple inscriptions, are here considered in the light of a sacerdotal science. Well, science of the sacred science, the science of the priesthood. This is 199. It becomes imperative, therefore, to clarify the broad outlines of such a science on the basis of what is known through Hermetic tradition. This is important because we deal with Memphite theology, which is a mythological story. So you get a sense of how myth is applied to give us a greater sense of the symbolism of the Memphite theology. As in the case in India, for example, architecture, writing, statuary, and bas reliefs become symbols of a genesis where historical facts are used as mere pretexts. Got that? Anybody doesn't have that.
Run that by us again, please.
It says architecture, writing, statuary, statues, and bas reliefs become symbols of a genesis where historical facts are used as mere pretexts. Bas reliefs are just like, murals that have the faces, carved in them and things of that nature. So everybody understand what they're talking about? Right? Yes, no?
This would be a bas relief, right?
Probably, yeah. Trying to carve in the wall. Usually bas reliefs are carvings, wall carvings, or carvings on monuments.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that because they use historical facts as pretexts, that what happened when the Western world came on the scene, they started to then take the historical facts and then trying to relate the myth to the historical fact and miss the point. The historical facts were just a pretext to just really teach a astronomical or cosmological or metaphysical principle. But it also gives a foundation, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll talk about when we talk about the relationship between Heliopolis, Memphis, Hermopolis, and Thebes. So it says, this is confirmed by the obvious tendency of these accounts to turn into fable what is nonsense in terms of time and space. So then you get into the Bible when they talk about the world's created in 6 days or it's only 6,000 years old, you believe that is literally true. As I said, here is where the accounts turn into a fable, which is nonsense in terms of time and space. Well, because again, though that literal thinking, they're going to try to then justify the seemingly historical fact as being literally true, and then condemn and persecute all those that question the validity of this nonsense. And I'm telling you, that watch these next 2 years in terms of this trend toward traditional fundamentalism and how this whole nonsensical fable is going to be used as truth to justify policy and decisions. The facts that serve as pretexts are important because they stress a play of circumstances beyond human volition. The will to the contrary is evoked and facilitated by the cosmic ambience that makes the fact possible, the action willed by man. Hence, there's a relationship between these facts and the esoteric meaning the myth aims to reveal. But when wisdom speaks, the historicity of the fact itself loses all importance. Key point here. The historical fact is not the point. It's the wisdom that is being expressed through the historical. Obviously, there's a history of the Pharaonic Empire, but it is not transcribed as such in the temples. And the figurations of the kings are certainly not portraits, even if there might be some resemblance in the features. The mystic names of the kings adapting the basis of the cult to cosmic time, the styles, the typical character of the temples, all conform too closely to the traditional knowledge teachings for any doubt to remain regarding the intentions. It is a deliberate transcription of thinking humanity's highest goal and the most exalted promise made to mortal beings, to bear proof of divine reality and to demonstrate experimentally the reality of the supernatural. Key point here is, it's a deliberate transcription of thinking humanity's highest goal and the most exalted promise made to mortal beings, to bear proof of divine reality and to demonstrate experimentally the reality of the supernatural. It's interesting because I think when we first started the class, I think I handed out those sheets on the 7 basic truths. Were you here for those? You think so? You think so? You don't know? Keyword for Aquarius is, I know. But if you do have them, you should go back and get them. Because like they say, they are the 7 basic truths. And if one cannot accept those 7 basic truths, one will not have the foundation for metaphysical understanding. And I say that to say because it says to bear proof of divine reality and to demonstrate experimentally the reality of the supernatural. And one of those basic truths talk about supernatural reality, the whole issue of miracles, of divine guidance, and that what we see as being the real world, the society projects as being the real world, and then the physical world is the unreal world, and the real world is the real world, supernatural, or the spiritual, the unseen. And you have to just bring these threads together so that you can see the references in the different material match in the basic sacred sciences, so it can give you some foundation to understand the other teachings. And although that is given by Archetypal Jones, who is a European, he was a student of the sacred science and then was articulating the sacred science in particular time and space. But anyway, I want to leave this and I want to go over to next page, which says on becoming. Same sheet, the next page. And all this will lead into this discussion. It says on becoming. Here are the broad outlines of the teaching. In order for undefined being to become a definite being, a seed is necessary. We talked about this, right? Because what is undefined being relative to the Memphite theology? And how is that defined in Memphite theology? No. In Memphite theology, undefined being. You answer the question or making a statement?
Well, it's making a statement.
Oh, okay. You know. In order for undefined being to become a definite being, a seed is necessary.
That's Patah coming from the water.
Whoa. When we talk about the circle, right, and the dot in the center, right. So the seed or impulse determining the undetermined can effectuate either a universal determination or a particular determination. The ordinary natural effect is a determination of the aim or fruit. And this genesis obeys immutable phases. The same process will rule in everything that is summarily determined. We're going to get into when we start talking about the top in terms of having the heart and the tongue. And that heart and tongue is resident in all the creations. The top being the seed. And the seed is the determination or the definite being of the undefined being. So in essence, Patah then takes of the essence of non-existence, of non-being, or undetermined being, because it is being, but it's undetermined, because it has no definite form, but it is. And so then, we talked about that whole generation has been the potentiality of the potential becoming real, the potential to become actual, existing. And then that potentiality generated the possibility, which created the seed that started the genesis toward the actuality, which was an impulse. Now, my only thing is I'm getting into, when we were talking about the Indian cycles of the Manvantaras, in terms of there's these great billion-year cycles where you have manifestation and non-manifestation, or being and non-being. And that even within these infinite cycles of human evolution, there have been infinitely other cycles where worlds have came into being, and who knows what evolved, and then transformed into whatever. We don't know. Because the point is then why did we reach a point where a seed was created? And why did we reach a point where a seed was created, in terms of, or is seeds being created at every moment of every minute? Or, so then our world's continuously being generated.
But who was the first mover?
Who's the what?
How would the first seed come into being?
Through the same way that all the seeds came into being. Because it was possible.
That escapes me, I swear.
Because it was possible. See, now the issue comes if you're trying to go and create a beginning.
Right.
See, where it's infinite.
Right.
So your finite mind, your finite mind cannot hold infinity.
Right.
So you just have to understand that it is and accept it.
Right.
If there's possibilities, if there's a possibility, then it will manifest. He will come to me.
I don't know. That's necessarily true.
If there is infinite,
All possibilities will not necessarily become into being, because see, there is an aim, and the aim is to bear proof of divine reality and to demonstrate the reality of the supernatural. And we also remember last week we talked about the aim was to become in harmony with the divine order, to become consciously in harmony with the divine order. So then the possibilities will be within the context of making that become real. Every possibility may not help to make that become real. So every possibility may not manifest itself. Because in this moment in time, there are all kinds of possible things you can do. You can't do all the possible things that you can do. So then what is the basis of you choosing what you're going to make real? What possibilities you're going to try to make real? There's something governing that. Now, innately, what is governing that is the divine part of you, which is the tie in you, that is driving you to try to move to spiritualize yourself. Now, in your conditioned mind, who knows what's there? It depends upon how you was conditioned, which then creates a different reference point that then makes you choose other possibilities. And which gets to the point of what we're saying is, unless we can create institutions and processes that realign the thinking of the masses into proper cosmic order, then all of these crazy possibilities, that are possibilities, will then become options. And people experiment around with it. Oh, it's a possibility I'll put a gerbil up my butt. You know what I'm saying? It's a possibility. Oh, my mind, your imagination can think of all, because it's infinite. So you can create a story of a person who sat around and just, his life is tripping off all the possibilities.
Still not on line. And eventually they'll get back to line.
One way or the other.
Just by that divine spirituality taking hold and maybe guiding it. Once it reaches
one way or the other.
One way or the other.
Because you can be realigned consciously, or you can be realigned unconsciously.
Right.
Which means you can just destroy your physical form, and your energy reemerges with the cosmos.
Yeah. And don't make it the first time, but maybe you come.
Yeah, well, yeah, the energy is going to, somewhere else in the universe, you know, that experiment is going to continue on.
Right, because it continued on with
so in that sense,
yes. Right.
That's right. In that sense, you're correct.
Sort of like a waterfall.
That's right. On a cosmic level, on a macrocosmic level, everything is going to stay in balance.
Yeah.
But on a particular level, which the universe don't really even care about, it can go, like you say, something can be just totally destroyed physically, but this energy itself will be utilized, you know, for the greater thing.
Yeah. Then karma's all involved in that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's a question. You know, I heard karma, cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? I mean, when you put out energy, and what you put out, you get back in terms of energy?
There it is.
Still can't
The
understand.
universe, why? The universe, whatever you put out is energy. The universe responds to energy. So whatever you put out, the universe feeds. So you create your own reality.
But look at us. We're being punished, we say, for something that our foreparents did.
Why do you say we're being punished?
Well, I think we're being punished, put in this condition here in the United States.
You might be being conditioned.
Yeah, you always got to look at it from that positive aspect.
Actually, we can be the leaders. We're not doing it.
We
Not
are.
consciously.
We are. So just think what it says right here. In order for undefined being to become a definite being, a seed is necessary. Who is the seed of humanity?
We are.
So, for undefined being to become a definite being, a seed is necessary. What's happening with the seed? The seed is all tripped out.
Right.
So that means that being is tripped out.
But in being tripped out, they will find the truth. And the truth shall make a stronger tree.
Oh, correct. That's correct. You're correct.
So that the same soil can't bear false fruit again. The same misunderstanding of the same.
If the wisdom is truly institutionalized,
Yeah.
right. Passed on and remembered it, not,
Yeah.
But yeah.
But the
That's
love
correct.
now being rediscovered through our own spirituality.
Yeah, through our, that's true.
Then humanity has to come to us
No,
for their redemption.
no. We are humanity.
Well, what I mean to say is the world, it looks like, it's what you said, the way I understand what you're saying. We're going to be the future leaders. First, what I mean by that is the knowledge is going to come from us and radiate out to others.
It's already happening. If you look at the way the world is being conditioned today, if you look at behind a lot of the popular images of culture, the energy, the nuance, and it talks about the ambiance. The basic ambiance of the modern civilization is a black ambiance. They just don't give us credit.
Right.
So we're already conditioning the world. The critical thing when we went to a dance conference, dance and drum conference, the level of love and positive energy that's generated in the working with drum and dance is uncompromisingly positive. I mean, it's just uncompromisingly positive. And it's really non-racial. In terms of true Africans, we have an attitude problem with the slave experience that we have to get over. But true African people ain't hung into that to erase that. But the lifestyle of the people is uncompromising love. That's not to say they don't have personal stuff; they have personal attitude and stuff. But the overriding ambiance of it is love, happy, positive, creative energy.
Can it transform the madness?
It's transforming.
The mad ones, should I say?
Definitely, it's doing it. It's happening. It's happening. It's just like right now, it's below the surface. It's like the waters haven't subsided enough yet for the hill to be exposed.
Before we're blown up.
Well, that's what all of us is a part of that. See, we all, it doesn't take but a seed. Each one of us is also a seed. Each one of us is a hill. So within each of our areas, if we perceive and understand ourselves to be what we really are, then we can then move to initiate that kind of environment, that kind of milieu, that kind of ambiance. As we all seek to do this, then you will start to polarize other seeds around you. You'll activate them. Then they'll rise up and start to create. And then they'll polarize other ones. And that'll rise up.
I understand that.
Right. And it is happening. It's just right now because we are in winter, in the seasonal period, we're in the winter. And so you just can't see all these seeds under the ground, but they're there. Like in the winter, you see every look appears like it's just death. But in the ground, the seeds are planting themselves and moving toward the surface. So the thing is, are we aware of what time it is and who we are? Because you also can be leaves that are acting as fertilizer. And they got a role to play. So the whole thing is, what role are you playing? They're killing off the old stuff that's really making the mulch or whatever that's fertilizing for the new stuff to break through. So it depends on what role you're going to play. That's why even what we see in the community in terms of death and destruction is playing a role in preparation for a whole new way of thinking.
I understand what you're saying. I really understand.
Right.
But to me, it seems like there's more madness than ever.
Sure it is. But isn't when just before you get well, don't you get the sickest?
Well, they
Don't
say
the fever
just
got to
before,
get the highest before it breaks?
that's what they say, just before the sunrise, it's the darkest.
That's right. That's right. But so what we're saying, it says here, is that the same principles operate on a universal level and a particular level. And so once you understand the phases and understand what phase you're in, then you can operate accordingly. So let's back to this. It says, every time any seed whatsoever gives the impulse to a determination of absolute being, whatever is thus called into existence is indestructible. This is heavy right here. This is heavy. This says, every time any seed whatsoever gives the impulse to a determination of absolute being, the key word is absolute being, whatever is thus called into existence is indestructible. This being, no matter what form it may take, and notwithstanding the decompositions or death the form undergoes, this being will be indestructible and can only return to original being through gestation. The gestation consists of acquiring, through the coagulating seed power, a nature alike to the nature of being, which was coagulated into transient form. Elaborate.
It's like me and my whole black people.
In one sense, talking about in one sense. Well, why do you say? Why do you say? What is your mind? How your mind come to that?
Going through this being, no matter what form it may take, notwithstanding the decomposition of death, the form undergoes, this being will be indestructible going to return to original being through gestation. So we've been going through deaths and stuff like that, but we're still here and we're still growing, even though we're going through deaths.
Oh, no, yes. Mental. Awareness. Physically?
Oh, yes, physically, yeah, we definitely.
With all this bad food and bad water and air and everything?
But we indestructible.
The gestation consists of acquiring, through the coagulating seed power, a nature alike to the nature of being, which was coagulated into transient form.
Oh, we're just going through something temporarily, I see.
But remember when we talked about, see again, all these little definitions I've been giving out are essential for you to understand as you go into this. Because the first thing that came to mind is the whole issue of the 7 principles of philosophy.
Psychology.
Right. Absolutely. And what?
The soul growing through bodies.
Right. It's
Meaning?
looking at
Meaning?
the soul is growing through bodies. Through bodies.
The soul is
Growing through bodies.
Well, that means
Key
there's
word
more
is,
than one body.
Key word is through bodies.
That's right, through bodies.
Right.
My soul goes to somebody else's. Now explain that to me.
No, it says the gestation consists of, first we go here, this being, no matter what form it may take, and notwithstanding the decompositions or deaths the forms undergo, this being will be indestructible and can only return to original being through gestation. The gestation consists of acquiring, through the coagulating seed power, a nature alike to the nature of being, which was coagulated into transient form. Which says back up here, undefined being to become a definite being, a seed is necessary. The gestation consists of acquiring through the coagulating seed power a nature alike to the nature of being, which was coagulated into transient form. So it's the soul that knows through its experiences, and the soul is evolving through bodies. The soul is evolving through bodies.
Oh, many bodies.
Bodies is multiples, yes. It's heavy. That's right. So the thing is, it's like, again, the possibility. Then we talk about evolution, evolution. I need my marker. This later. This will get into it just. Okay, we got, right? So we got undetermined. Really, it's undetermined up here. Undetermined up there. This goes here. Right. Here we have unconscious. Here we have self-conscious. And here we have cosmic conscious or spiritual. Okay. This can be instinctual. This can be, instinctual, individual, and then the other one is universal. Okay? This is the Genesis process, right? Mm-hmm. First you had undetermined being, possibility. The possibility was to become consciously creative. To become in harmony and constantly in harmony with the divine order. And that was a possibility. Now for this to become a possibility, it had to have a seed, had to start. The seed contained the whole essence to be achieved, which actually is the soul. That soul is a seed, which is because the actuality, the human race itself has a common energy. It's almost like a collective thing. And then each of us are different aspects of that, the possibilities within the human race. Okay. Which collectively will evolve us to this level of cosmic consciousness, because no one person can do it all. So you had to have multiples.
I see what you're saying.
Right? Because each thing that we do feeds the greater whole.
Right. And
we're all accumulation of all the realities and all the experiences of the whole human race.
That came before.
Right.
Right, I got you.
And so then, but that was, that's, so you got the one seed, but then that seed then multiplies into other possibilities to help make the actuality become real.
So you got it good and bad.
Yeah, that too. But ultimately, that's the trial and error,
right,
working its way.
Right.
Okay, because sometimes the sprig comes up and hits something hard, it bends around and boom. Sometimes it's in the shade, some of the fruit get ripe, some don't. But then it evolves. But anyway, so you start off instinctually, at an instinctual level. So that's why we say we were in animal-like form. We were not animals per se, we were animal-like forms. And so then in the traditional tribes, the people really lived in a very natural, instinctual level. They were just at one with the universe. They didn't take any more than they needed. They didn't destroy just for the fun of it. They lived in harmony. That was really, we were still connected to our instinctual level. We were basically unconscious of this greater world, because we lived within, 60 miles or whatever. That was our whole world, physically. But spiritually, we were in tune with the universal. But that was only that was a limited potential, right? So then the journey through experience, we start migrating all over the planet, going through different experiences, changing diet, Then we started evolving to individuals, the different individual groups, because originally you and the group was one. Wear the same clothes, talk the same, ate the same food, almost identical. Each generation identically the same thing. But that's really, to me, why slavery happened, is to break that up. Because in traditional society, we always related back to the way the ancestors used to do it. And as evolution started to change, some new changes had to happen. And the European way had to come in because it set up the process for this materialistic world, where now the globe has actually become united in terms of this technology, some of the positive aspects of this technology. But also it took us up to ultimate self-consciousness, where the Europeans came and they evolved individualism to its maximum negative, which is the opposite of the instinctual, the collective, because we were maximum collective.
Right.
So then the opposite was maximum individualism. That's
Maximum
negative.
Yeah.
Say maximum negative?
It's a maximum negative because the humanity is social. You don't create yourself.
That's right.
You don't exist by yourself. Only in your mind. But at the same time becoming self-conscious. So it's the extreme which became negative.
It's like you said, it's maximum negative because in the instinctive, you could only go out and gather what you needed for that day because the world or your environment contained the rest. It was like a storehouse.
Right.
Whereas the individualism, what he does, he goes out and hoards as much as he can possibly get for many, many days or many, many years, like these people do with money. They hoard so much money, they can only spend so
Law of
much.
scarcity.
Right.
You can only buy so much.
Right.
Right.
But yet still, they still hoard so much.
Right.
So it is maximum negativity on the individual level.
Right. But it's a place within the phases.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're moving to cosmic consciousness, which is really the Aquarian age, which is the age of synthesis. That's where the individualism will be united with the collective, or in a conscious way.
Also in that individual, they tend to get into a human-created environment instead of a natural environment. Everything that they want to relate to, like...
So it's basically a function of the ego.
Yeah.
And then the ego becomes the source of power as opposed to one's inner self or spiritual self being the source of power. And then there's a whole psychological reason why that happened in terms of behind the glaciation processes. First of all, part of the issue is the calcification of the pineal gland separated them from that instinctual feeling toward the spiritual thing. Plus the separation from Africa and the tropics. The shock of the transformation of going through that glaciation, because if you really go back in the transition that African people made once they, for 1,000 years, became trapped behind those glaciers, there was a tremendous amount of death that went on. As the survival had to happen, those who were dark skinned started dying off because of the rickets and the lack of sunlight gave their weak bones. They started becoming brittle. They started dying out. And so then you had a major traumatic experience, just being trapped behind those glaciers. You know how many people starved to death and maybe cannibalism and all this stuff. So then psychologically, they repressed that experience. So then as they approach African people and the energy of African people, it starts to ring bells in their subconscious mind in terms of how they were back in ancient history, but they have to go through that wall of trauma. So just like psychologically, when a person goes through very traumatic experiences, they get amnesia. The mind wants to block that out because it doesn't want to bring all that pain back to the conscious mind. So a part of the issue is when they come in contact with black people is parts of themselves that they now have repressed and think as being negative. When they come in contact with us, it stirs that up. When it stirs that up, it has a feeling like they're getting possessed or some evil is coming to them. So what they do is they project it onto us as being the source of the evil because they don't understand the whole psychopathological situation that created this civilization. And so then as we rise up and become stronger, what it actually does, the projection of their own blackness, which with the ego is like it's going to kill it. In a psychological sense, it is going to kill it because it has to die. But their concept of death is final, and that death is not a transformation. So then they have a sense of foreboding, or that I'm going to be destroyed. So they projected that they're trying to destroy me. When in reality, we're trying to transform them. Because the seed is trying to actualize itself. For the seed formulates what? In the darkness. So see, all this stuff is mixed in with this whole psychological evolutionary process. Right. And once they gain a totally different orientation in terms of cosmic order or whatever, but that doesn't matter because they're a minority. Once the seeds coagulate themselves in true harmony with their true nature, all the other compartments and components will then fall into order just through the ambiance, which is electromagnetic frequency that will repolarize them to be in the proper order.
That'll bring it from their subconscious mind?
Yeah, they come from, because see
the
now,
subconscious.
because like the thing with African people, I'm telling you, the drum community, the brothers from Africa is straight up with it. They're saying the drums don't belong. See, black people say, don't let the white people play the drums, that's not drums. They say, the drums don't belong to nobody. Because the drums are expression of spiritual unity. And so then the thing is if you go through the changes to learn how to play it, you have the right to play it. But that's only a form of a universal principle that they're talking about. And so the thing that Europeans do, they try to project onto us their psychology of what they would do in the positions were reversed.
Right.
But we don't come from there. And they can't understand how these people, under all these crazy conditions, can still love and have this humanity. They can't understand that.
They're not compassionate.
It's a mystery to them.
Would it be fair to say they're not compassionate people?
Their compassion has been deconditioned through their whole evolutionary process with their environment. They couldn't be compassionate because their environment was too harsh. It was survival of the fittest.
See, it was just like this Smith woman, blaming the black man for kidnapping the kids. So the newspaper reporters were going around in the community they asked some of the blacks, well, what do you think should happen to this woman? Well, she should be forgiven, or what do you think should be done to her? Well, she needs help. Go after white people. Well, she should be put to death.
Look at 187. Now they got everybody. They got 3 strikes for us. 187, which is murder under the penal code for them. I mean, for the Latinos or Mexicans or anybody that could be suspicious. Now, it's sort of worked in reverse because now all the people of color are studying and say, well, hey, let's look at the ones who are manipulating this.
Right.
And then it's going against the constitutional restraints and it won't fly.
Right.
Because it's not uniform. It has to be uniform throughout all the 50 for it to even fly. And so it'll probably go up to the Supreme Court and get bounced back down. But it has the negative aspects of it turns everyone else against those that are in favor of it.
It says the gestation consists of acquiring through the coagulating seed power a nature alike to the nature of being, which was coagulated into transient form. That means the nature of the seed is going to call into manifestation what is necessary to make the seed move toward where it has to go. And what is, it says, this being, no matter what form it may take, and notwithstanding the decompositions or deaths the form undergoes, this being will be indestructible and can only return to original being through gestation.
That handles it right there.
On page 201. For example, if a moving ball, the activity of undetermined being, encounters another ball in repose at rest, the seed obstacle, an exchange of energy will occur. But if as a result of the many shocks received, shocks of deaths and rebirths, the inert ball is put into motion and this motion becomes alike to the motion of the active ball, then there is an equality. There is no further exchange of energy. There is identity. Existence ceases as phenomenon.
Whoa, that's deep.
You understand what he's saying?
Yeah.
But you're listening after all this happening, I mean, if we're the ball that's moving and all the shocks and jets, I mean, by natural form, they're going to have to give us that.
One way of looking at it. This image conveys first the effect of the determining seed through its resistance to the infinite activity of undetermined being. Then existence through the exchange of energy, and then deaths and rebirths, that is real becoming, in order to end with liberation from the particular existence. That's a key piece of it. Just tell you the whole 9 right there. Yeah. So basically what they're saying is that in becoming, these deaths and rebirths create existence where you constantly encounter this interaction with this beingness, right? You constantly encounter, you constantly get hit with it, right? These choices. And after a while, eventually it's going to stir you into movement. And once you're stirred into movement in response to that level of energy, then there no longer will be need for it to be in its physical form. The physical form is only a necessity to provide you with the experience to realize who and what you really are. And once you come to that realization, you no longer have to come here anymore. Which is a whole other issue. Existence in particular and the phases of the genesis of the particular form serve as general symbols to describe a becoming which involves 3 essential aspects. First of all, the seed produces a scission of the undefined into definition. So then once something's undefined, it becomes defined.
Chalkboard. It's white.
That's true. Well, how much one cost? It's probably on chicken one. See, this is what is called corruption. Corrupt, Latin, calm, together, and rupture, to break into pieces. The philosophical putrefaction. Back to putrefaction. What are we talking about putrefaction with? We had a whole little section we were talking about putrefaction relative to what? That's how you got memories there. Certain key words are to trigger certain images in your mind. Putrefaction. Anubis. We're talking about Anubis and the jackal and putrefaction and discrimination and being a guide of the soul. In this phase, the seed loses its initial aspect. It now fixes undefined being and begins its corporification. Become corporified or becomes solid. The seed rots in the earth. The spermatozoa apparently dies. This is metaphorically called the black phase. This original scission or separation produces at one and the same time, key word here, we're talking about Memphite theology, all different kinds of Memphite theology. The root. This original scission produces at one and the same time the root, black in nature, what's that, chorion or placenta, and the germ, the embryo in the amnion, amnion, white in nature. The second phase is white. This is the vegetative phase, giving form and body to the undefined. Nourishment and respiration give life to the being now determined. The black impurity has been cast away below. Don't get hung up on that word. The third aspect is red. It is animation, the completion of the fruit, the concretizing of the original and abstract impulse into a particular form which can give forth a new seed and then die again. These are the three great phases of Genesis which are constantly evoked in ancient Egypt and which can be found at the base of all its symbolism. For example, the sacred scarab is the hieroglyph designating all transformation or evolution. The life of this insect presents the following characteristics. That's good. The scarab lays its eggs in a pellet of dung, which it buries underground in absolute darkness. The black phase, which will last for about 1 month until the egg reaches maturity. From this egg, a white larva is born, which during the second month of white phase feeds on the substance of the egg and digests. Next, there comes the nympho phase, during which the immobile mummy works its transformation. From this mummy emerges the new scarab, the head and the thorax of dark red, the abdomen of opaque white, and the wing sheaths of translucent white. The scarab itself, the final fruit, will again be black. So really you have 4 in 3. That's right.
Yeah. It's where the right.
Right.
Indeed.
Can the 3 phases and even the 3 colors be better symbolized? And we'll go through this real quickly. This is real because the 3 phases, red, white, and black. Black, white, and red are also very heavy in Yoruba. And there also is something else I want to do with strong.
What's yellow?
Huh?
What's that?
I mean
Like
yellow.
you're in the Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Europe.
The black, white, and red. Black, white, and red bring to mind the 3 colors constantly evoked in the Pharaonic symbol. Black is one of the names of Egypt because of its black soil. Black is called Kim, and the black Kim or Kemet. White, HDJ. How do you say that? Hajj, Haji, is the homonym for light, and also designates the white mace that strikes the impure in order to evoke the pure. It also designates the white crown of the south.
Wait a minute, that was heavy right there. Designates the white, makes it strikes the impure.
In order to evoke the pure.
So the impure, huh? So the impure walking around white?
No, don't get hung into a racial thing. It also designates the white crown of the south. In the temple of Luxor, south corresponds to east through the arrangement of the crowns, so that south equals east, the sunrise equals the left equals white, and consequently corresponds to our spring. We get into that. Red, what's that? Sure, not sure, whatever I can. Qualifies the desert, dryness, and the Scythian animals of the blazing land. It is also the crown of the north, Horus, who at Luxor takes his place in the west, so that north equals west, sunset equals the right equals red, and corresponds to our autumn. This equating of north, west, and red, and of south, east, and white is already specified in one of the Quranic texts. In many instances, it is found in the temple of Karnak, among others. I'm going to do talking about the seasons, because they have 3 seasons, which,
I thought there were 4 seasons.
initially in Kemet there are 3 seasons. The inundation, the harvest, and then the dry season, which it talks about on page, at the bottom of this, in 203. 3 aspects of Genesis can also be approached from the 3 seasons of the Pharaonic year. The Pert season, winter, mid-November to mid-March. Pert means seed, to emerge. The meaning of this denomination is the emergence of the black earth when the flood waters recede. An annual repetition of the creation myth. When the primordial waters, from the primordial waters, the first earth emerges. This earth is Kim, the black. The Shem or season, spring, summer, mid-March to mid-July. Shem is written with the basin and 3 lines of water, which intrigues, physiologists, where it would sooner seem to be the symbol of inundation. Nevertheless, one can attribute it to the white, luminous head character of spring and of summer's becoming Cancer moon. The Akh season, the inundation, mid-July to mid-November, begins with the heliacal rise of Sirius around July 19th of the Julian calendar, actually the 4th of August. The sun entered into the constellation Leo. Ankh has numerous homonyms, including horizon, fire, glory, splendor, the blaze of solar rays. But in order to designate the flood season, which is a culmination and opens the time of renewal, this word is written with a papyrus clump, the first appearance of light. Theology, you have to understand the whole relationship between Heliopolis, Memphis, Thebes, and Hermiopolis. Now, each of them talked about an aspect of the whole Genesis process. Now, we talked about, what were those 3 levels of the netters that we talked about? There were 3 levels of the netters. Common summons, and what is the common summons? The cosmic summons. What is it summoning? And we had talked about what was the true meaning of the king, what was the true purpose of all that stuff. You know, exact words, what do you think it is? Should be kind of obvious.
Realization of being.
The what?
Realization of being.
Okay.
The king represented the state of consciousness that everybody could attain.
The spiritualized man, illumined, spiritual consciousness. So the summons was calling for the realization of spiritual consciousness. So that is the pull, that is the context in which all these things are occurring in terms of us evolving into spiritual consciousness. And everything is occurring within that context, if we want to recognize it or not. Okay. Let's go back into theology, and here's some handouts here. Evoking the divine spirit within your own self. We talk about various levels of consciousness, techniques that you can evoke or cause to come in. We actually create an environment or a what I want to talk about. I want to say what's the word? Ambience. That's it. You create an ambience in terms of through utilizing of meditational techniques, through sound, through color, through music, through smell. What you actually do in rituals, what they actually did is they created an ambience that equated to the particular level of consciousness they were trying to evoke. And through participating in certain ritualistic activities, through utilization of these sounds, these symbols, these rhythms, these movements, these smells, they then cause for the consciousness to unite with that particular level of awareness, and then one could open up to things equivalent to that level of consciousness. Same thing is true in the music when they go into various trance states. They use certain rhythms equate to certain principles, which then will put a certain sensitive person into a mediumistic state with that particular energy, and then they again can bring forth information from that particular principle or level of consciousness. So anyway, that's the kind of thing we talk about magic, yes.
Yes. Also, when you go into yourself and get connected with your spiritual self, and you listen close enough to your spiritual self, each one of us has our own sound, our own card, our own thing that once you find out what it is, it can connect you to, so that you're able to go into the spiritual world easier.
Yes. Because even in traditional societies, many times you had a spiritual name that only specific people in your immediate family knew. Many times by coming and whispering that name, that really crazy state they were doing that to show you all the consciousness. But in this book, it talked. What got me into this book, we started talking. I was dealing with the Memphite theology, this whole thing about the noon. Okay, that's what got me. Let me go back to this. Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man. Page 58. Was the region out of which life first came. This is, of course, particularly true of the sun because of the daily re-emergence from the depths, and of the Nile because it consists of ground waters. But the phase who came forth from noon is used for many other individual gods and of the council of the gods as a group. So it's talking about noon, basically talking about it being the primordial abyss. And it also talked about what I got into, I was just talking about the noon being this primordial abyss. And then it talked about another point I want to get to first that took me to psychology. Kemet, his thing is, did ancient Kemetic people think in philosophical terms? You know, he's trying to ensure they have philosophical thinking, you know. So that's his point, but in terms of trying to prove his point, he transmits a lot of information. You know? So I jump past all that to look at this information. He says, this new text turns as far as Egyptian could turn toward a creation in philosophical terms. The thought which came into the heart of a god and the commanding utterance which brought that thought into reality. This creation by thought conception and speech delivery has its experiential background in human life, the authority of a ruler to create by command. But only the use of physical terms such as heart for thought and tongue for command relate the Memphite theology to the more earthly texts which we have been considering. Here, as Professor Preston points out, we come close to the background of the Logos doctrine of the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So before undertaking this difficult text itself, we should lay out for ourselves the known fact that plays into the interpretation of the text. First, the Memphite text takes off from the creation stories which I have already recounted. A tomb coming into being out of noon, the primeval waters, and a tomb bringing his enad of God into existence. The Memphite text is aware that these were prevailing concepts in Egypt. In place of discarding them as competitive, it wished to subsume them into a higher philosophy, to take advantage of them by pointing out that they belong to a higher system. That higher system employs invention by the cognition of an idea in the mind, and production through the utterance of a creating order of speech. So he's saying invention by the cognition of an idea in the mind, which relates to the heart. Okay. So I want to get it back around to how this was applied to you in your individual life. The whole idea of you following the wisdom of your own heart. Go into your intuitive mind and your spiritual self and the various ideas that come out of that. Then the next thing is the utterance of the creating order of speech is being consistent with what you say and what you do. So when you say something, are you really going to do it? Because if you're going to really do what you say, then you're going to start watching what you say.
True.
Because then by you saying it, you become committed to doing it. So then you start watching what you're saying. You also, when us talking about the power of words in terms of you start to hold certain ideas in your mind, psychically you're projecting that energy into the universe and it will draw back to you what's related to those ideas. Now, thought and speech are ancient attributes of power in Egypt, personified as deities. Again, personified as deities. Deities represent principles in our earliest literature. They occur normally as a pair of related attributes of the sun god, who, authoritative utterance, that speech which is so effective that it creates, and Sia, perception, the cognitive reception of a situation, an object, or an idea, whose Sia are attributes that carry governing authority. In the pyramid text, the ruling god leaves his shrine and surrenders his office to the deceased king because the latter has captured who has control of Sia. In our Memphite text, there are two attributes of power. These two attributes of power are taken in material terms. The heart is the organ which conceives thought, and the tongue is the organ which creates the conceived thought as a phenomenal actuality. All of this is credited to the activity of the Memphite god Ptah, who is himself thought and speech in every heart and on every tongue, and thus was the first creative principle, just as he remains now. So Ptah is the first creative principle that comes out of the noon, which is the undetermined being. So Ptah is the seed, the universal seed, out of the universal undetermined being. And Ptah is within the speech and heart and tongue of every created thing, which goes back to what concept?
Magic principle.
Right. Which states what?
The quality, something about you, of all the parts.
Distributed throughout its parts in contact with the entities will release those problems.
Right.
Word.
What's significant? So what significance does it have to you?
By going and finding a time me, I'll release the universal baton. I'll be in tune with the universal baton.
Right. That's why meditation is so important. Because through meditation, as you go back and reunite with that divine aspect in your own self, it keeps you in harmony with the cosmic order. That's where you get the cosmic summons in terms of your particular call, which is happening all the time. But because our mind is so full of static, in terms of us, worried about all these other kind of things, we can't hear the call. So we get out of harmony. That's why, again, while the priesthood created ceremonies and rituals, they say that 75-80% of our time was either in practicing or preparing for rituals. This is traditional life. That means that 75% of our time was always in tune with a spiritual reality. Well, now I don't even know if 5% of our time.
15 minutes doing good. That seems to be direct relation with the usage of the brain capacity.
Yeah.
Could that be possible if you have thoughts throughout the day? Say every day you might say, dear God, my God. Does it necessarily mean you have to always be in a ceremonial type thing?
Well, first of all, how do you define being a ceremonial type thing?
I mean, like you say, meditation can be done in many ways.
That's right.
So if you
what is
take
meditation?
a daily walk, you can go within to yourself and go with nature.
That's right.
So you can do that.
That's right.
Yeah. That way you can even if you wash dishes, you can go into a meditation state. Sometimes you can do something and then realize how to get that done because you wasn't really there, you were someplace else.
The other thing is as you do what you have to do during the day, what is the reference point within which you're doing it? If you're always acting relative or related to the greater or higher order of things, you then can be in a constant state of meditation, which is what the ultimate is, to be in constant consciousness. To be constantly conscious is that you're constantly conscious of where you are in the process of evolving towards spiritual realization. So your whole life is governed from that center. So even if you're shoveling dung, you still can be a spiritual experience if it's related to this whole Genesis process. That's why a lot of traditional people could do what Western people call menial work and be just as happy because they understood that it was connected to a higher order.
Now that would mean that the role of visual arts, such as television and whatnot, would be anti that because it now gives you a whole other paradigm for you to focus on.
That's right.
That's why when you have to look at a show or something like that, you have to break it up. Show you 5 minutes of that and then 2 minutes, 3 minutes of commercials to keep. In other words, keep you occupied thinking about a chapter, thinking that they can't give you a straight hour or something, or straight 2 hours or something, and you just focus into it, and you begin to see the symbolism, what the characters represent, then you break it up, and you focus on something else. It actually conditions you to be able to not to focus.
Right.
You know what? That goes back to something I remember you talked about with my kid. And then, was it the light movie? Yeah. Because it makes the color symbolism. Right. In movies or in the whole idea of telling a story, it all is what is being coming out of Hollywood is actually based on that Osiris line. All of the characters represent variations of that.
Variations of what? The creation?
Yes. I mean, the stories, the whole idea of telling a story is based on that whole principle.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And they've come up with a way of manipulating it so that you're actually using the concept against you. So I know what you're using it in a negative aspect. You're using our symbolism against.
Well, we are the foundation. I mean, language, visuals, all that came out of us. But again, it's the articulation of the antithesis.
Right.
You know, and so they're just expressing the function of their experience and their environment. And so that's just what that is. Now, the issue is that once we become knowledgeable, it loses its effect. Right. Because at the time it goes into your mind, your own base of standards will repolarize what goes in and put it into its proper context. But again, once we have a medium where you can get this information into the memory banks of the masses, so they're going to constantly have to be governed by this other stuff.
Because the information he's talking about, I don't know how widely disseminated. Well, I know that they what you're explaining now, there are certain groups of people who understand this, who have studied this, and who are purposely manipulating the mindset such that it can be manipulated in this fashion. They understand this principle exactly.
Right.
But if that's true, but if your mind is meditated on a certain level, you're only going to take in a certain amount of information anyway, and that's the information that you yourself only want to take in once you're aware of it. So they could chop it up to pieces. But if you go into a level of meditation, then that's sort of bypassing. Before you know it, you're right back, and you don't relate to the breakup because it's you that can tie it right together.
Let's keep on this. It says in the text, it goes on to talk about how the part of the text which we are interested in begins by equating the Ka with the noon, the primeval waters out of which came Atum, the normally accepted creator God. This in itself makes Ptah antecedent to the sun god, and that priority occurs in passing references in other texts. But our text does not leave the priority implicit. It states the mechanism by which Ptah produced Atum. Ptah, the Great One, he is the heart and tongue of the Enad of God, he who begot the God. There came into being in the heart, and there came into being on the tongue something in the form of Atum. This is the invention and production of Atum. Out of nothing, there came into existence the idea of an Atum, of a creator God. That idea became in the heart of the divine world, which heart or mind was Ptah himself. Then that idea became upon the tongue of the divine world, which tongue or speech was Ptah himself. The Egyptian uses pictorial or physical language. It says elliptically. In the form of Atum became in the heart and became on the tongue. But there is no question of the meaning. Conception and partition reside in these terms. But Ptah's creative power does not stop with the production of the traditional creator God. The great and mighty is Ptah, who has transmitted power to all gods as well as their spirits through this activity of the heart and this activity of the tongue. Nor does the creative principle stop with the gods. It has come to pass that the heart and tongue control every member of the body by teaching that he, Ptah, is throughout everybody in the form of the heart and throughout every mouth in the form of the tongue. Of all gods, of all men, of all animals, of all creeping things, and of whatever lives, by Ptah's thinking as the heart and commanding as the tongue anything that he wishes. In other words, we have no single miracle of thought, conception, and articulation, but the same principles of creation which were valid in the primal waters to bring forth Atum are still valid and operative. Wherever there is thought and command, there Ptah still creates. Basically saying is then that the potentiality was resident in the undetermined being, in the void, in the blackness. And then that essence of the possibility and the actuality to be able to create that potential, it actually is an idea. That idea then created the seed, and that seed then created the energy or the impulse or the so-called the speech or the activity that initiated the frequency, the vibration that started creation. So in actuality, the possibility, which is a zero, first of all, you had unlimited unbeing. Then the possibility of a conscious being created, that idea created a seed. Because when the idea, now again we get the problem when this happened, that's a whole other issue, but the thing is the idea then causes for coagulation. That coagulation creates the seed. It also creates a vibration or distinct energy separate from the undifferentiated, which then creates the beginning. Which then the beginning is actually the word, the articulation, which is the energy of the thought. Just like when you get a thought about something, that thought then generates other thinking.
Thought is energy.
The thought is a seed, because in the thought is all of the wholeness of the thought. But at the same time, that means that within us as a community, the reality of what is supposed to be is resident in us now. So the solution to our problem is resident in us now. All we have to do is to turn inward and focus in on that reality and stop being deterred, being faked out, being distracted.
Go back to the first.
Through the external, which is the transitory stuff. And once we can do that, but they always keep us, they don't want black folks to get together, they don't want to see y'all talking, they don't want you to do this, they don't want you to do that. Once you can just stop tripping off of him, keep you, busy, and just focusing on what do you want to do? What do you want to create? Not what do you want to destroy. Because once you trip off destroying, then you're into the Sethian trip. Then that means he can win, because that's his level. Right? What you do is you focus in on creation. Because when you create, what? Two things can occupy the same space at the same time. At least not the same level of substance. Right. But in terms of that. But, so anyway, that's the key. Now, I want to So we talked about this. This is so we can get into more, but the key point is Ptah is resident. There's more pieces here, but get the book, y'all. Yeah.
What page is this?
This was page 59. Yeah, through, yeah. I jumped around really gets into this whole Memphite theology from around page 50. Well, really the nature of the universe, the whole chapter on the nature of the universe goes into this whole creation story. But anyway, I want to jump around quick a little bit. So when I was doing that, what came to my mind, first of all, what came to my mind is the collective unconscious. Read this, study this. This is a profound outline of all, to get into analytical psychology, you got to read all these different books. This outline gives you a succinct overview of the major concepts of the psyche. But if you go on the first page, analytical psychology is a school of depth psychology based on discoveries and concepts called. Jung gave the broadest and most comprehensive view of the human psyche available. His life included a fully developed theory of the structure and dynamics of the psyche, in both its conscious and unconscious aspects. A detailed theory of personality types, and most important, a full description of the universal primordial images deriving from the deepest layers of the unconscious psyche. This is the noon. These primordial images are called archetypes of the collective unconscious. The latter discovery has enabled Jung to describe striking parallels between the unconscious images produced by individuals in dream and vision and the universal motifs found in the religious and mythologies of all ages. The concept of the collective unconscious gives analytical psychology an added dimension in the comparison with other schools of psychotherapy. So dominant is bringing in the feminine, but the feminine is operating on an unconscious level. And so then it's not consciously accepted, which means then it becomes a negative. Which then it becomes becomes a shadow figure or an evil thing. And so then, at the same time, because things are so I don't want to get into the distinction of talking about homosexuality, why homosexuality is so rampant in our society at this point in time. Because the male energy has become so dominant, it provides no outlet for the receptive or the feminine. And because we're in a transitional stage of civilization where the creative side is necessary, the more receptive side is being called for, which represents itself in the form of the feminine. Because the society is so either or, it provides no feminine expression from a male. So then a male then who has a feminine or more receptive or more subtle nature then feels dis-ease or not in harmony with this masculine, dominant, Eurocentric view. So then consciously, what does that mean then? There's no place for them in the male world. Well, the society says if you're not a male, then what are you? Right. You got to be a female. Where in African society and other traditional societies, males had traditions and rituals where you expressed your feminine side. And females had rituals and enactments and ceremonies where they expressed the masculine side. They actually did dramas where men would dress up like the female energy, or certain groups would act as the female, but because it was a collective experience, all who experienced it were able to express this energy. There's certain dances where you express a lot of feminine energy, but because it's in the context of the various dances, it's okay to move like that. Where if you were just walking around this society and start moving like that, somebody call you a fag or something, you know. But then if you had a need to express that energy, then you might be saying, well, that must be that. So anyway, but it's more complicated than that, but fundamentally, basically that's what we're talking about. Right? The point I want to get into. It talks about, what I really want to get into, and my time is starting to run here, is that, and I'll jump around, I'll get into the read, but at the back of Stolen Legacy, that's going to be for next session, we want to deal with the Memphite Equation. It's interesting, you see this little symbol right here? The Memphite Equation is taking the 4 elements fire, earth, and water. Basically, pause here. Pause a minute. Let me draw this out. 30 minutes. Got 30 minutes? The handout, okay, while I'm doing that, in this handout, go back here to the page on structure of the psyche. And so what is true for the universe is all true for your psyche, because your psyche is an individualized reflection of the universe. So that means that if there's a noon in the greater universe, noon within inside of you. There's a Ptah in the greater universe, there's a Ptah inside of you. There's Atum inside of you. There's Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys inside of you as principles that are part of your psyche. They're part of these archetypes. So read that out, make this drawing, then we'll jump around a little bit here. A little diagram. Basically what I tried to do is show how this is the psyche. Again, this is symbolical. This is not how it's actually structured, not linear. So you have the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind, your conscious mind is only, 1/4 of your total psyche. The unconscious mind is 3/4. The greater part of your psyche is of the unconscious level. Then, on the conscious mind, now the unconscious mind is like a sea. The symbol is like a great sea. And so, floating in that sea of unconsciousness is the ego, which is your concept of who you are, yourself. That ego is conditioned by external conditions. When you come into life, you come in as a child, your ego is still attached more to your unconscious self. It's more instinctual. It's trying to be who it naturally is. The external world then starts to condition that ego in terms of don't do that, that's not good, you're a stupid fool, whatever, TV, black is bad or ugly or whatever, your hair, kinky hair. All these things start to condition his ego. And the ego then produces a persona, which is the mask that we use when we go out into the world so that we can not be, persecuted. So you create this mask, this persona. Now, all those things that you naturally desire to do when you was a kid, you might want to climb up on beds or run around naked or draw on the wall or, go in the kitchen and mix up all kinds of stuff. You came in and said, "Oh, that's bad, don't do this, don't do that." That that pushes down into your personal unconscious. Your personal unconscious is all those things that are supposedly not good that then you don't want to hold in your conscious mind. You suppress them into the subconscious mind or the personal unconscious mind. Below, so that becomes the level that he calls the shadow, where all those things are supposed to be bad or housed, also called negative. Now, the negative things in there could actually be positive things. It could be that I could have been a great artist, but then my parents think art is stupid or no skills there, so they repress that. So whatever they repressed in you, or whatever society repressed in you, or whatever, becomes submerged into the personal unconscious and becomes a shadow. This is where the whole concept of the devil comes from. Those things that are bad or evil. Then below the shadow is the greater collective unconscious, where they talk about these archetypes. The archetype of the great mother, of the wise person, where inside the concept of the self is down the collective unconscious. It also is the anima and the animus. That means that your conscious mind for a male, his conscious mind is male. His unconscious mind is the opposite, which means it's feminine. For a female, her conscious mind is female, but her unconscious mind is the opposite, which means it's masculine. So using our society, what you do, because we don't have an understanding of how to unite or have a unity in your own self, then usually you are attracted to people that project, that match the way you relate to either the feminine or the masculine. So then if I have a certain way I relate to the feminine in myself, if I was going to be a woman, I like to be a woman that was like this kind of way, wear certain clothes and act certain way, So then when I see a female that acts that way, I become attracted to her. And it's through experiencing her that I actually am experiencing the feminine in myself, and vice versa for a female. If she was a man, she'd like a man to be whatever, so then she would be attracted to those kind of men. That's the way then they can then experience the masculine within their own self. And then also, that then also can lead you to the experience of the self. The self is actually the unity of your conscious and unconscious self into a whole, It's the potential for wholeness that's in there. Now, what I'm getting at is projections. The unconscious mind is a dark place, it's a mystery because it's not conscious. Okay? So then when energy comes from the unconscious mind, which can be from the self or the soul, and tries to communicate with the ego, if the ego has not been trained to understand that there's a mysterious part of itself that is okay, and it's not, whatever is dark is like, negative or evil, then when it starts to get these feelings, it's thinking that this dark side of me is trying to get me, right? And if you equate the dark side with being evil or negative or all the other kind of concepts, then you're going to think the devil's getting me or, Satan or whatever is trying to possess me. And so then those things that trigger those feelings become the devil. So that woman, she's full of the devil. Why? Because she's making him relate to the feminine in his own self, which is part of his repressed self, which as that energy tries to then contact the ego, it has to go through what has been suppressed by society. So then society says you're not supposed to feel like that, and you start feeling like that because of things you say, or what you do, or where you dress, or whatever, then I'm going to project the fear and the negativity onto you. So the only way that I can maintain the safeness of my conscious ego is to destroy or control you. Again, this is through ignorance, not knowing what's really going on. So the more black people move to be who they are, the more white people get intimidated because we activate those energies within inside of them. Because they don't acknowledge them, their ego is thinking something's trying to possess them, trying to swallow them up, and has a feeling that it's going to die. And because they haven't been trained to understand why, they literally feel that their life is being threatened. And so then they will move to try to eliminate whatever it is that's stimulating that in them.
I got a question. So then that shadow area basically functions as a filter of some sort.
Well, it's really
filter out certain things or let certain things through.
Right, based upon your condition.
Right.
And that's why usually what happens is based on whatever repressions, this is what they call the psychic, this is the hell within your own mind. Because to get to self, you have to go through there to commune with self. And so if you haven't been prepared to be able to withstand all this repressed negativity, when you go down the journey towards self, which is a spiritual journey, you encounter all kind of negative situations and things in your life. That's when they hit the hell. And they talk about when Jesus initially had to go into hell and confront himself down in the undifferentiated unconscious mind. And our tomb, in a sense, possibly may be the ego. Because it's through your ego that you name and create things. Now,
so that means that Christianity has actually taught not to go.
that's right.
Well, control versus
Yeah, right.
Or control versus
It's coming up to do what you said again.
Not to go down and deal with that. It tries to put it outside
Right,
itself
yeah.
as opposed to in itself.
go through a mediator.
Right. Which means you keep projecting. That's why they saw him with the devil and all, because, and then the whole thing about evil and sin, that natural things are bad.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you have these natural, we talk about the libido and the natural drives, then you have to repress that. And then by repressing that, you create a shadow. The shadow then, the more you repress, actually you can create similar kinds of repressions. Repressions will constellate themselves because energy can now be created or destroyed and changed in form. So what happens when you start repressing energy, it attaches itself to something else. And then if you repress people heavily, then they can become obsessed and seemingly possessed.
Right.
When their egos and the persona can no longer handle the pressure, then this stuff can become released. And then it can actually take over the ego. There's guys shooting all these people and stuff like that. Now, if you go back and study his personal history, you can see all these various things that became repressed.
Right.
And then once his outer self wasn't able to cope successfully with the outer world, then the shadow gonna come up and gonna take over. Say, all right, I'll take over now. This is what you need to do. Shoot all these people.
Right. Or it could be induced.
That's right.
Which is mine.
That's right. Because they talked about it here about the whole Nazi Germany thing.
Right.
Yeah, he did it.
And they even talk about what they call Negroes in here in terms of this repression is actually the denial of their own relationship to. They talk about we're sexually free and we move and all, all this. Well, all this, that's stuff that they're repressing within their own selves. So anyway, but that's just that led me into. Let me drop this off on you, then we're gonna get into this other one next week. I'll tell you what. This here comes out of this is the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. And the Tree of Life is actually divided into 4 levels. And those 4 levels are the archetypal level. And I want to read what it says about them because then you also can you can see how these things are related to these same ideas that we talk about. Again, the Kabbalah itself came out of Kemet, the so-called A Moses, took people out of Kemet and started the whole Hebraic tradition, which is basically based upon these 10 centers or gates, which in a sense could probably be the Enad, articulated. But instead it talks about it's four realms or dimensions. You have the archetypal world, the creative world, the formative world, and the world of action or the material world, or the 4 worlds. These 4 worlds can also relate to spirit, soul, mind, and body, which is also related to the Yad-He-Vad-He, which is the Tetragrammaton, or the sacred name of Jehovah. But I want to read what it talks about this archetype. This comes from the book A Garden of Pomegranates by Rigardi. So it talked about here, it says, the archetypical world is the highest, being absolutely ideal. It is the plane of the divine thought, the causal plane of cosmic ideation. The next world is a plane of a less spiritual and less abstract. Here the creative forces of the gods perceive how the archetypal ideas of things expanding and vivifying and developing. This is the mental plane proper, comparable in cosmical constitution to the conception. Because on this one, I took this one, this mind, this could be placed here and made mind, and this level could actually go into emotions. In the formative world, this is the plane of the astral forces. The ideas are projected still further, being clothed here in design or model form of electric and magnetic matter. The astral substance is an omnipresent and all-permeating fluid of extremely subtle matter, of substance in a highly tenuous state, and in the process of further evolution, it produces and acts as a substratum to the material world, which is a copy of the astral in a more dense and gross material. And then the last level is the world of the material, which is actually just an expression of the astral, which is actually then a reflection of the creative, which then is based upon the seeds of the archetypes. Now I also mention this because when you read the outline of analytical psychology, it's going to talk about archetypes within the collective unconscious. Also it talks about personality types, the 4 personality types, which then takes you back to the 4 sons of Horus, or the 4 poles upon which the material world is built, which are the 4 elements, fire, air, earth, and water, which is Yad-He-Vad-He, which is Jehovah, or the creative word. I'm just trying to show you how all these things are really interconnected and are basically connected to the various levels of consciousness. And how those various levels of consciousness are the basis from which all creation is made. And if you take it back to your personal self, then each of the elements are related. And there's a book called Alchemy. Do I have that book? Yes. Oh, I got to take a science too. This book is called Alchemy by Scarab. Now, in this book, this is a biographical thing. One of his students was talking about his experience studying with him. But the heavy point in here, well, the whole book is deep. Might be a little too, out there for folks. But they have pages of illustrations in this book. These illustrations are totally profound. I'll make copies of them for our class next week, because the class next week we're going to deal with the Memphite Equation. Because in the Memphite Equation, it gets into the alchemical process of the three elements of creating, preserving, and destroying, and the three qualities and the four elements of fire, earth, and water, and how through those three and those four, all created things are produced. And so it talks about here, first of all, this thing here, it talks about unity is under intuition. And it deals with, well, here he has number. Then he has sight, which is the plain image or color. Then on the other side, he has tone and sound or hearing. And then at the bottom, he has volume, which talks about touch, taste, and smell. Because it deals with volume, right? It has volume. Touch it, smell it, there's some volume to it, I can taste it. So those are the four components. The five senses, right? Because the five senses are actually the mechanism that we gather information through which we experience existence, through which we gain information for the evolution in the Genesis.
That's why it was expressed as the light and sound.
With light and sound. Yeah. The other thing is, what are the two primary components of melanin? It's light and sound. The two primary sources of energy, which melanin absorbs and transforms into other forms of information. Because light contains information. Which then it talks about how African people hear sounds other people can't hear.
Right.
And see things in a different way that other people don't see. Which has a whole thing about how we need to learn, how our education system needs to be. But then he talks about here, about, he starts talking about a oneness, the absolute, duality, which is polarization. And we talked about the whole thing about from light to the photon and the neutron, and then we went to the atom, and then the molecule, and then from molecules you create the material plane, then the vegetable plane, then the animal plane, then we evolve into consciousness. And so again, from that it then breaks into the trinity of function, substance, and form. But then it goes back to activity, substance, and form. These are three primary aspects of how creation operates. In terms of activity, then there has to be a substance to give that. Once you create activity, activity itself formulates substance into a form. Because it goes back into what? The idea created the seed. And then created the activity that caused for the coagulation, the necessary form to make the genesis of the seed move to actuality, pattern. What he also says in the psychic level is that if we focus in on clearly visualizing what we want to do, the clear determination of that idea will start to generate the forms necessary to bring that idea into reality. A lot of things that keep us from moving is because we want to guarantee all the forms before we move. But it's really in reverse. Until you start moving, you can't generate the form. Because you have to make the commitment to the idea through the movement that initiates the activity, which then the universe feeds you back. It's true for your personal life and in all other phases. Right.
There's a thing they call chakra.
Chakras? Chakras.
I already hung one on my door. I hung there's a thing in chakra where you hang on your door facing to the street. It keeps towards the evil forces. It keeps negative out. And there's a certain way that to live in your apartment or arrange your house that you have a certain corners of your house that are more positive than other corners.
Yeah, a lot of that is based upon cosmic geophysics. You know, because the Earth itself is situated relative to its poles, in terms of how energy flows. You know, you're electromagnetic, so then how you align yourself to that will also, affect how you sleep and all these kind of things.
Like don't put your bed by the door. The door entrances.
Well, some of that, see, the bottom line is consciousness reality. Because see, if you evolve your consciousness to a certain level, you can almost do whatever you want to do. Because your mind is now operating at a level higher than a lot of other things that affect other people. Like I was talking to these Buddhist monks, they're saying once they relate to a certain level of consciousness, they will eat whatever they want to eat. Because they transcend the effect of the food, because their mind is operating at a whole other level.
I can deal with that.
I just have a picture.
You can't let it become a rationalization. If you haven't reached that level of consciousness, it don't have an effect on you.
I hung my picture on the north side of my room, and it's a picture of lots of money. Lots of money. And I'm leaning forward to that end so I can support your skull if it all comes true.
So anyway, in basically what I'm endeavoring to do is, again, just try to expose you to the depth of the material. Give you the references so you can follow up if you are so moved. If not, give you enough handouts. If you study them, you will definitely gain, some profound insights. But really to again, show how, this cosmic philosophy, what it's talking about, but how it applies to you in your personal life. And that how then the answer to our problem is within our own traditional philosophy.
Right.
If we can truly get to know it and then start to live by it. The other thing is, if we don't generate enough knowers, how then are we going to spread this information to educate the masses? That's the critical issue. It's a critical issue because they don't know. And so unless we know, how are we going to teach others to know? And then the kids, that's what final point was for now, I'm trying to summate on this moment, is that on Pluto rules generations. Pluto is a generational planet. If I can find mine, never see it. I've tried to pull those out. But anyway, I'll bring the specific information, the specific dates in. I think roughly between Pluto goes into Sagittarius in January, which Sagittarius deals with philosophy, law, religion, also deals with self-righteousness and expansion, morality, with philosophy. So it'll be there roughly between 1995, it'll go retrograde and it'll go back in Scorpio up until October of 95. So April's gonna go back in Scorpio again. So you're gonna see, what I'm projecting is that from January till about April, you're gonna see some very interesting things that are gonna be projected out to the world. They're gonna be like previews of coming events. Then you're gonna have a kind of a retraction or some kind of a pullback period between April and October, and then the energy's going to come back out again. So then in the next, between 1995 and about 2010, this energy is going to be operating. So you're talking about globalization, expansion, but you're also talking about self-righteousness and religious fundamentalism. Self-righteousness meaning that I'm right and you're wrong type thing. All right, so just watch. Just you can see the vibes already put themselves into position. At the same time, the whole issue of philosophy and who's right, who's wrong, whose philosophy is right and wrong. World, so this whole thing about Afrocentricity and the battle to try to really, it's going to be a major onslaught in terms of trying to really crush, demonize and discredit that whole way of thinking. Almost to a degree of a kind of an inquisition type of thing. Now in 2010, Pluto goes into Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is the taskmaster. Saturn is constriction, is the state, is limitation, is confinement, is oppression. We're talking about probably a certain form of fascism is going to hit. That's going to be from, but I mean, righteous. Yeah, but I mean, it's righteous. So you're talking about from 2010 to 2025. 2025 is where Pluto goes into Aquarius, which is the age of revolution, radical transformation, liberation, strife for freedom, innovation, creativity, all this. At the same time, underneath all this, there's going to be this tremendous element of creativity, innovation, research, and revealing going on in preparation for this
great
breakthrough.
That's a Scorpio?
That's going to be those seeds that in preparation. Well, let's see that too is those seeds that are being germinated in preparation for this breakthrough that's going to be precipitated when that Capricorn comes in with that oppression. Because when you squeeze things in, you got toothpaste, squeeze it, and it's going to pop out. Okay. But the thing is that the kids, because when I went to Ensemble, and I was looking at those young people going, I said, man, there's some beautiful people up here, trying to be conscious of Taoism, which is this African Centered order, really, fraternity. And so I was looking at this, and so then I started talking with the other sister the next day, and I was talking about how, we were talking about this, how in 2025, the kids who are going to be coming of age in 2025, which means there'll be kids that'll be like, because the age cycle is every 0 to 28. 28 is when you finish being a young person. From 28 to 56 is really adulthood, and from 56 to 84 is really eldership. So those kids that'll be coming of age 28, 25, 28, in 2025 will be born in 1997, or the ones that are being born now of 2025. The ones being born now in the next 3, 4, 5 years are going to be those that are going to come of age. So even those that are like 17, 18, which is the youth, are going to be the ones being born in the next 10 years. Which means, then we were talking about how this whole thing about the conditioning, the first 7 years of conditioning, how when kids are conditioned a certain way, their conscious ego becomes conditioned to look at the world in a certain way. And after 7 years, their ego crystallizes. We also was talking about how the fontanelle and your spiritual door fuses to where however your conscious mind has become conditioned, now will determine how you interpret the spiritual messages that are coming up trying to come into your conscious mind. So now I'm saying, well, that means then if we could raise up a generation of kids that were conditioned to really see the world based upon these principles, then when they became crystallized, they would be crystallized in this context, as opposed to how kids are becoming crystallized now under all this other stuff. Which means that a part of the work is to get this information to that generation that are going to be having these kids, so that they can raise these kids in such a way, it's only going to be a certain portion of them, but to raise these kids, if that could be possible, that then you're talking about having a generation that when that time comes, that are really so in tune, that will become that seed, that will really be the foundation for that group of, I would say that the fighters, because we'll still be here, but we're going to be elders. you know, to help give that, you know, greater context of, okay, yeah, go ahead, whatever. But what I'm just saying is metaphysically is the way we have to start operating in terms of being able to set certain things in motion that have a more long-range effect as opposed to us just being so reactive to the moment. So, at the same time, just being aware of these greater cosmic cycles, because it's going to happen. Now, specifically, I can't say just specifically how the game is going to play, but at the same time, if we don't create an infrastructure where we can communicate and function amongst ourselves, then we're just going to set ourselves up to be victimized.
I'm going to talk to you once that's over because
I think my minute is up. Is my minute up? So next week we're going to deal with the Memphite Equation. And we're dealing with, and if you are so moved or could get the book on alchemy, the Bodhi tree, they do have it in paperback. And look and read up on how the things we're talking about in terms of the alchemical process and how it's related to the five senses and the interpretation of reality, and also this whole thing about Quranic consciousness. Never lose your humor. That's what I'm telling you. Don't lose your humor. So, Saturdays.